Challenge not accepted. Russia's Vladimir Putin was a no-show in Istanbul. Not the greatest start to ceasefire negotiations he himself called for. The snub and Russia's latest list of demands aren't going down well with US President Donald Trump. So, does Russia really want peace? And is the US running out of patience? It's up for debate here on CounterPoints with me, Melinda Nucifora. Anyone else getting a sense of deja vu? Istanbul has hosted the first direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in 3 years. But the whole thing feels like a bit of a case of back to the future. Same maximalist demands from Russia, same staunch refusals from Ukraine, and same outrage from Europe. After 3 years, the sides seem further away from a deal than ever before. And there are signs that Trump's patience with Russia's Vladimir Putin is starting to run out.
We have to meet. He and I will meet. I think we'll solve it, or maybe not, but at least we'll know. And if we don't solve it, it'll be very interesting.
Interesting indeed, because on the horizon are what US Senator Lindsey Graham has described as bone-crushing sanctions. But is it enough to force Russia seriously back to the table? On this episode of CounterPoints, we'll debate if Russia's president is truly interested in a peace deal. What concessions would Ukraine have to make to get there? And going forward, would it be more beneficial for Europe to bring Russia back in from the cold? Stay with us. To discuss the Ukraine-Russia negotiations and explore the details of any potential peace deal, I'm joined by Christopher Steele, the former head of the Russia desk at the British intelligence service, MI6. Also joining our panel, Sergey Markov, a political scientist and former advisor and spokesperson to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Ilya Ponomarev, the chairman of the Congress of People's Deputies of Russia, made up of Russian dissidents, and he also switched sides and joined the armed forces of Ukraine to fight against Putin's invasion. Gentlemen, welcome to CounterPoints. Well, stopping the bloodbath, that was US President Donald Trump, his list of agenda items before he started his call with Vladimir Putin. Prior to that call, he also spoke to Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky. Now, according to Russian state news agency TASS, President Putin told Trump both Russia and Ukraine will have to make concessions and that the root cause of the conflict must be, and I quote, eliminated. So, Sergey, let me start with you. Is President Putin genuinely interested in peace?
Yes, Vladimir Putin very much interested in peace because Russia already paid a few 100,000 lives to this war. And also, maybe 2 or 3 times more Ukrainian people also have been killed during this war. And for us, Ukrainians, it's also part of the Russian people. It's my opinion, it's the opinion of Vladimir Putin, which has been expressed by him in different media. It's the opinion of absolute majority of Russian people, according to sociology. And we know that Ukraine has been part of the Russia during more than 1,000 years, and Kiev was the capital of Russia during 3 centuries. And the native language for the something about 70% of the people in Ukraine is Russian language. So for us, it's great tragedy. It's civil war. And of course, we should stop this war as soon as possible. But Putin cannot agree with Donald Trump, who demanded during this call a 30-day ceasefire. Because this 30-day ceasefire will be used by Great Britain, France, and other European countries for sending their troops to Ukrainian territory. sending the occupation troops to Ukrainian territory. And in fact, after some provocation from Vladimir Zelensky, new stage of the war will start again. And as a result, it will be the war between Russia and France and Great Britain. It means about Russia and NATO, which will be very easily moved to the nuclear catastrophe. And all of you, my friends who are listening to us, will be killed because of this provocative suggestion of Vladimir Zelensky. And of course, that's why Russia
Ilya, go ahead.
For the peace deal, but with conditions. Specific conditions will be solved. And it means that the political terror against Russian people should be stopped in Ukraine. Political terror against Russian language should be stopped. Political terror against Orthodox Church should be stopped. And this is main reason of this war. It should be resolved. It's exactly what.
Okay. So, Ilya, you seem to want to say something. Jump in.
Peace. Just 10% no.
Yeah. I obviously, when Sergey is saying that people in the West would be killed, I'm asking by whom? Not by Ukraine, I suppose, by Russia. So that's very much self-revealing who is the aggressor here. And all this ideas that the ceasefire can be used for, I don't know, Great Britain to send its troops, just out of reference. Not a single time any of the military cargoes or railways were actually hit by Russian missiles because they are not precise enough. So they are good for hitting power plants in Ukraine. They are even better for hitting presidential apartment buildings because there are a lot of them in the city. But they are really bad in hitting the narrow railway tracks. That's why there was not a single attack throughout the whole war. And that's why all the arguments that this ceasefire will be used for relocated troops is simply bullshit, because it was not happening and it would not happen in future. But coming pragmatically to the issue whether Vladimir Putin wants peace or doesn't want peace, I think that peace and Vladimir Putin are things which are incompatible, because currently the whole system of power inside Russia is hanging on the question of war. And that's how it started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, and that's how it continues now. And whether the fighting in Ukraine would be stopped, Vladimir Putin would obviously invent something else, and most likely it would be Baltic states or Poland, I don't know. But the ceasefire absolutely can happen, because Vladimir Putin is interested in building a new relationship with the United States. Vladimir Putin is interested in showcasing Russians that he claimed certain victory, at last. And that's why I'm pretty optimistic. It's just that he understands that it is Donald Trump who is pushing for this. And so it's a possibility to sell him the ceasefire for a higher price. And that's what he's trying to do at the moment.
Chris, what do you make, Christopher, of these characterizations? Do you think that Putin wants peace?
I think everyone wants peace on their own terms. And the trouble is that peace has to go with justice in order for it to be long-lasting and durable. And going back to the basics here, the fact is that in 1991, Ukraine voted for independence. And in fact, all the regions of Ukraine, including Crimea, did so in a free and fair election. And then in 1994, that was recognized and codified by the Russian Federation, amongst other countries, in the Budapest Memorandum, by which Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in order to have territorial guarantees from those powers. And those powers included Russia, and Russia should obviously honor that agreement. And the problem is, of course, that if Russia's not prepared to honor that agreement, what agreement is Russia actually prepared to honor? And going forward, I think the problem is that, as Sergey was saying, Putin certainly and people in the Russian leadership regard Ukraine as part of Russia and the same people with the same background, and not as two independent sovereign states. And I would say the analogy for us in Great Britain is Ireland, which speaks the same language as us and has very strong historic roots with us, but which is an independent sovereign state, We recognize that independent sovereign state, and we have good relations with it now, and we haven't always in the past. And that actually should be the model for which Russia and Ukraine move forward, in my view.
There has been mounting and continuous reports over the years that Russia and Ukraine had tentatively agreed to a deal back in 2022, but it was Western allies, particularly Boris Johnson of the UK, that pressured Ukraine to reject it. So, Ilya, do you think that Ukraine should also shoulder some responsibility for there not being a deal and this war having continued for so long?
Well, look, Ukraine has been attacked, and Ukraine tried to protect its territory and did its best. And the question of fighting, you cannot foresee what would happen years ahead of you. And it's not something where sides can just sit at the table and say, okay, so we have this military power, you have that military power, and so let's decide on something. It doesn't work like this. Also, there were a lot of false promises on behalf of Western allies to Ukraine in 2022 in terms of military assistance and in terms of support for the counteroffensive that was planned in 2023, which never materialized. If actually everything that was done by the West for Ukraine throughout these years happened in 2022, I think this war would have ended long time ago. And we already have peace right now with the territorial integrity of both Ukraine and Russia. But there are no ifs in history, so it didn't happen. And right now we are in the situation of a strategic equilibrium when no sides can achieve no strategic advances on the field of battle. So right now we are in the situation of war of attrition when every day there are a lot of people being killed from both sides for nothing. And it's more and more a war of draws. And there is no end in sight. And that's why right now the situation is really different. The rationales of both sides are different. And that's why I'm convinced that in a not so distant future, we will have the ceasefire, because it's the only rational way out.
Sergey, as I mentioned earlier at the top of this segment, we're hearing from the TASS news agency that the Russian president has said to Donald Trump that the root causes of the conflict must be eliminated. What do you think President Putin means by that? And do you think that that is a logical or a realistic demand?
Yeah, and I'm starting from the giving a reaction to the Christopher Steele remarks that Russia agree or disagree with independence of Ukraine. Russia not happy about independence of Ukraine, but Russia was agree with independence of Ukraine during 23 years before the military coup of 2014, when democratic president had been overthrown, and when instead of democratic system, criminal regime took the power. And this criminal regime in Ukraine from 2014 cannot represent people in Ukraine. For example, this criminal regime prohibited Russian language everywhere, in fact, but in the region like Crimea, Donbass, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and by the way, Kharkov and Odessa as well, people, 90% of them speak Russian language. It's their native language. It means that this regime cannot represent them. And it's not democratic. It's a suppression regime. That is exactly the main reason. So, solution of the problem is democracy to Ukraine. Ukraine was in absolute security nearby the Russia during 23 years when Ukraine was democratic country. When Ukraine has legal, normal government. And it means the solution of this crisis is Ukraine coming back to the period before 2014, to the situation of with democratic, legal government. It means that also a specific thing, system of terror, which includes neo-Nazi groups such as Azov and S-14, should be disarmed, prohibited, and should go to the prison. But on contrary, dozens of thousands of normal political people, peaceful people who is now political prisoners should be liberated. Also, all prohibition of Russian language should be taken out from 2014. It's strong Russian demand. Russian language should have equal rights with Ukrainian language is in Ukraine. Also, political repression against Orthodox Church should be stopped. It's absolutely clear Russian demand. We're fighting not all the territories. Russia have a lot of territories. Russia army fighting for the freedom of Russian people in Ukraine.
Ilya, I can see... Sorry, yeah, Chris, Ilya, I can see both of you wanting to respond here.
Yes.
I think that
I just want to remind
point about
that
Chris, go ahead. Sorry,
Russia,
Chris, go ahead. Then we'll come to you, Ilya.
Okay, no problem.
I think the points about the Russian language and the Orthodox Church are perfectly reasonable. I don't see why either should be outlawed, but I don't think that's the fundamental stumbling block here. The fundamental stumbling block from my perspective is in fact territorial and in terms of sovereignty. And the fact is that Russia does not believe, or the Russian leadership does not seem to believe, that Ukraine should be an independent sovereign state which takes its own decisions. Ukraine is, of course, far more democratic than Russia at the moment. And going back to 2004 and that era, of course, President Yushchenko, who was elected at that time, was mysteriously poisoned as well. So there's plenty of evidence of Russian malpractice in the Ukraine.
We seem to be having a little bit of an audio issue with you there, so we'll go over to Ilya.
I don't think that's helpful in going sovereignty on both sides.
Yeah, I will pick up where Chris has stopped. I just wanted to remind that at Russia's helm right now, there is an internationally wanted criminal by International Criminal Court. The whole thing in 2014, the Maidan revolution has started because Ukrainians wanted to get rid of the convicted criminal, which was installed by Russia as the president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. Vladimir Putin recently has assassinated in prison the top anti-corruption fighter activist in Russia, Alexei Navalny. So the thing is, who is the criminal regime, I think, is absolutely obvious. It's actually funny how Russian officials are always trying to describe Ukrainian with exactly the same words that are applicable to Russia. Maybe, this whole idea that there is one nation is what they cannot say inside the country. They're trying to say it about its neighbor. But at the end of the day, who should care about criminal or not criminal? It's either it is a sovereign nation or it is not a sovereign nation. The demands of Russia to respect sovereignty of Russian Federation are absolutely legitimate. But nobody wants any regime changes in Russia, unfortunately to me. But that's why Vladimir Putin is still in power. And everybody demands from Russia just one thing, that Russia would respect sovereignty of all its neighbors.
From the phone call that we're reporting on between President Trump and Putin, President Putin has said that both sides will have to make concessions. Now, the US has previously criticised Ukraine's apparent intransigence, saying it didn't hold any of the cards. And then back in March, we heard Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that Ukraine must be ready to give up some of the territory it's lost to Russia since 2014. So, Chris, let me ask you, should Ukraine accept territorial concessions if it leads to peace?
I think there are two issues here. One is what we call de jure recognition of territory, which is internationally legally recognised. And the second is de facto recognition of territory, which is obviously a pragmatic situation on the ground. And I think I have a big problem with the first because, of course, the precedent it sets for the international community and international relations is very serious. But I would see potentially a situation where de facto Russian occupation of certain parts of Ukraine was accepted. And I think actually, in reality, the Ukrainian government is also been talking in those terms with a view to longer term trying to get some kind of settlement over sovereignty of those parts of the country which are currently occupied by Russia. So I think Ukraine probably, maybe under pressure, but nevertheless is prepared to make some territorial concessions, but not de jure ones, not internationally legal ones at this point, until such a time as relations between the two countries are stabilised, which may take quite some years, I think, to achieve.
Sergey, what do you think? If it's just a de facto recognition, but it means we do get a peace deal, isn't this just going to happen again in the years to come? I mean, how can this reach a long-term solution?
You know, the fact that we discuss territorial issue is just a reflection of a propagandistic approach that Russia is fighting for the territory. But I already told you, and Putin told me many times, we're not fighting for territories.
So then why has Russia claimed that it controls, that it now owns Donbass, Crimea and Luhansk?
Yeah. It's because people in those regions already trust Russia, and Russia cannot betray them. If Russian army will go forward, Russia will take another territories as well. But Russia wants to stop its offensive because Russia wants the right of people in Odessa and Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and other cities should be respected. Russia fighting for the respect of their rights is a key issue. And if Western countries will express same view as our now discutants, means full ignoring on real reason of this war, of course this war will be continued. It's exactly what Putin wants to stress. We should resolve those problems. It's not the issue of the territory. And Russia, where the principle is very simple. Where Russian soldiers already come, they will not leave because people already cooperate them. If Russian soldiers will come down, these people will be under terrorist behavior of the Ukrainian government. So we don't discuss this territory. We should discuss what will be happening on the territories where there are no Russian troops, where are no Russian soldiers. In those territories, democracy should come. The terrorists as Azov and another friends of our discutant should be disarmed, arrested, and should be in the court for the war crime. It's exactly a Russian demand. But this is new war. It's a new war identity. That's why language and Orthodox Church so important. Those who organize this regime is first of all American and British intelligence service. They want by terror to crash Russian identity of Ukrainian people and make anti-Russia. If Russia can agree that nearby Russia will be anti-Russia, will be a threat for everybody. They want relation between Russia and Ukraine to be like between Israel and Palestine, like between India and Pakistan. Is we can agree with this? Never. We want to resolve this problem. Ukraine, yes. Anti-Russia on the territory of Ukraine, no.
Okay, Ilya, what do you make of that? Is this not really a territorial war after all, even though Russia's put its flag in parts of what was Ukraine?
Obviously, it's very funny to hear that Russia, which assembles a global union of dictatorships, and is the leading dictatorship by itself, actually teaches Ukraine how to become a democracy. It's an interesting thing, but again, it doesn't matter because I personally, being a fighter for democracy in Russia, I don't want Ukrainians to come to Russia to overthrow the regime and to install some new regime. I don't want British to be there. I don't want French to be there. I don't want Americans to be there. It's our job. It's a job of Russians to do it. And it's obviously up to Ukrainians to decide what kind of political regime would be there if there are no atrocities, and there are none. And the international community sees for that. About the question of territories, I actually, for the first time, tend to agree with Sergey. It's not a war for the territories. It's the existential conflict. Putin wants control over Ukraine in general. And as Sergey correctly said, Putin wants to dictate to Ukraine what the political regime would be there, what language the Ukrainians are to speak, what's their lifestyle should be, what global alliances they should be part of. So that's a denial of sovereignty rights of another nation. And that's why for Ukrainians, it's an existential war. And that's why all of the country, including Russian-speaking part of the country, is so much mobilized against the invaders. And actually, the Eastern Ukrainians are more mobilized against the invasion than sometimes people from Western Ukraine, exactly because they want their independence and they understand what this so-called Russian world is about to bring to them. These referendums in those territories of Zaporizhia and Kherson, obviously, they were scam. It was repeated like this in world history a lot of times. The occupation of the Baltic states was happening in 1940 with exactly the same procedure, scam referendums, and then these referendums were used to justify the aggression. So we shouldn't pay any attention to them. If there would be an internationally recognized procedure, international observers, and no occupation, which happened beforehand, then they could be called referendums. Right now, it's just a scam.
Thank you, Ilya. Now, I know that you have a pressing engagement and you need to leave us, so thank you for joining us on CounterPoints. Ilya Ponomarev, who is a former Russian MP. Thanks for your time. We're going to stick with our remaining two guests and move on to our third segment. President Trump and his administration has made it very clear it's no longer interested in footing the bill for European security, prompting governments across the continent to pledge greater defence spending in upcoming budgets. In March, the EU announced its rearm plan, an €800 billion spending package to significantly boost defence capabilities, something Russia has criticised, calling the plan provocative. So, Chris, let me ask you first. Is it not better and perhaps cheaper for Europe to just improve relations with Russia for its long-term security rather than building up its arms and looking towards more conflict?
Well, that's exactly what we tried to do, I think, in the 1990s and into the 2000s. And unfortunately, the problem is that Russia's sort of view of the world and of international law and international sovereignty is not where it was then or where it should be, in my opinion. And nobody wants to spend money on rearmament. We have other priorities in our society, health, education, the economy, none of which benefit from huge investment in weaponry and proliferation of weapons. But the reality is that we have to be able to defend ourselves. And the sad thing is that under the Trump administration, we're not sure that Trump would honour the Article 5 in the NATO Defensive Treaty, even though actually it was us that came to America's assistance when that article was invoked after 9/11. And it is, of course, a tragedy that we're in the situation we are with Russia. But the problem is that there's a complete breakdown of trust. And in Britain, you know, we've had incidents like Litvinenko and Skripal and so on, none of which have been resolved properly. And therefore, this deficit of trust means that we have no choice, really, but to rearm ourselves going forward.
Sergey, what do you make of that? Is the issue between Europe and Russia just a breakdown of trust?
Russian relation with Europe has, three intensive centuries. And for Russia, Europe was the good example of what Russia should do. So Europeization of Russia was the ideology of all Russian reforms, including Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, semi-German, I would say, semi-European, and he wants to build such kind of partnership between, strategic partnership between Russia and Europe. But I want to say this again, 2014, before 2014, all this could happen because Ukraine was a democratic country and we have relations. After Europe supported absolutely clear 100% repressive terroristic regime, which is the main fact, which is our colleague, ignore. And after this, Russian-European relations already undermined, and Russia may turn. Because for us, what means the Ukrainian project of Europe? It means that Russians should be killed. For us, it's preparation genocide, which already have been made in the much more bigger scale, of course, by Adolf Hitler and other Nazis. But this, again, first step of the genocide. 8 years, Ukrainian regime killed Russian people on Donbass.
But Sergey, do you think it would make more sense for Europe, if I can bring you back to the question, would it make sense for Russia and Europe to have open diplomatic dialogue than continuously looking at conflict? Is Russia willing to come back into the diplomatic fold? Does it have any interest, any trust with Europe?
Yes. For us, from our point of view, it's absolutely inevitable. We should have normal dialogue and finding solution and so on. But now it's impossible because to move this, European countries will have to recognize that they support 100% terroristic criminal regime. It means that Macron should go to the prison, Boris Johnson should go to the prison, and another, they're criminals. And of course, it's very difficult to make such dramatic change for European countries. Probably in the future, it's exactly will happen. But now it's not prepared. That's why, by the way, these people now are undermining European democracy. The main opposition leader in France now arrested. Main opposition leader in Romania, just his victory in the election have been cancelled. Brandmauer, as vice president of Vance, told on the Munich conference, they made Brandmauer political system instead of democracy. It means that some group of the European politicians who now taking the power and who use this Ukrainian terroristic regime, they became criminals themselves.
Okay, so, Chris, what do you make of that? Do you think Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron have a case to answer for, Christopher?
Well, I'm certainly no fan of Boris Johnson and never have been. I mean, he took us into Brexit. But I think this is on a completely different scale. And what's being alleged is simply untrue. The fact is that our leaders have been democratically elected with proper mandates, and they have pursued those mandates through time. And there's a consensus really in the UK, I think, on this one issue, perhaps the only issue actually, between the Conservatives and the Labour Party, which is on Ukrainian sovereignty and support of Ukraine. And I don't think that's any coincidence, whereby in a democracy we have disagreements, very serious disagreements on things like Brexit and all sorts of other issues. But we don't really disagree on this issue, where we have to support the maintenance of international law and where we have to support the sovereignty of independent countries like Ukraine, particularly where we've given formal guarantees and undertakings in international treaties, the Budapest Memorandum and others, to do so. And we're certainly going to stick with that.
Very, very briefly, because we need to wrap up. So let me ask you one last question for you both to respond to very, very briefly. Your expectations, Sergey, are we near a lasting peace in this war? Are we close?
No. My expectation is that this negotiation during the spring will be not successful because the distance between two sides too big. And after this, a new period of the intensive fighting will be continued during the summer and autumn. And as a result of this fighting, into the end of this year, more real peace negotiation will be started. And to the end of this war, we will reach some agreement. If Russia will be successful, Ukrainian regime and European countries will have to step down.
Okay.
If Russian offensive will be not successful, probably Russia will have to agree with some bad conditions such peace deal.
Christopher, wrap us up. Do you think we're close to a deal?
Well, interestingly, I actually agree with everything that Sergey has just said. That may not be terribly useful for him. But the fact is, I think that neither side at the moment has a strong incentive, other than pressure from Donald Trump, to agree any kind of peace deal. And I think that the battlefield will decide in the longer run the conditions by which this conflict is settled. So I think that is an accurate assessment.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us here on Counterpoints. Christopher Steele, the former head of the Russia desk for MI6, the British intelligence service, and Sergey Markov, a former advisor to Vladimir Putin, and our former guest who left us a short while ago, Ilya Ponomarev, the exiled former Russian MP who's been fighting with Ukraine. Thanks for your time on Counterpoints. And to you at home, thanks for joining us on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nucifora. Remember to subscribe to the Al Arabiya English YouTube channel and make sure you never miss out on our debates or exclusive interviews. So follow Al Arabiya English on social media, including X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.